This video will delve into the clay deposit located east of Claybank, Minnesota. First of all, if you haven't watched the video, Famous Clay from a Ghost Town, make sure to check it out. It sets the stage for this video by going over all the background information. The clay fields around Claybank are really quite remarkable. However, a lot of time has passed since they were used, so their history has been lost. We really need to discover that lost history again. During this video, watch for these specially marked Red Wing jugs. They will contain the combination to unlock the safe, so we can discover the lost history again. Remember to note the numbers on these jugs, and we will unlock the safe at the end of the video. Let's start by taking a closer look at the spur track that ran to this valuable clay deposit. This 1894 map of Goodhue County shows the town of Claybank and the spur track that ran to the clay deposit east of town. There was one main spur that tracked east from Claybank. This is the 1894 map of Goodhue Township, which shows the path of the Duluth, Red Wing, and Southern Railroad, as well as the spur track that branched off to the east. The clay deposit is shown within the blue circle. Here is a 1938 aerial photo of roughly the same area as the 1894 Goodhue Township map. It also shows the main line of the Duluth, Red Wing, and Southern Railroad and its spur track to the east. The clay deposit that helped feed the Red Wing clay industries is again circled in blue. Now compare the 1894 plat map to the 1938 aerial photo. We will be spending a lot of time looking at the area highlighted in yellow on both images. This is a topographic map of this same area. The clay deposits east of Claybank are located in higher terrain, not a low spot. Therefore, the elevation along the spur constantly rises from Claybank to the clay fields to the east. If you were to look at the same image, then add a side view of it as well, you can see how the terrain rises from west to east. Let's start by looking at some of the railroad features around Claybank. This 1938 aerial photo shows the main line of the Duluth, Red Wing, and Southern Railroad, as well as the spur track. The photo also appears to show a side track, located near the spur track to the clay fields. The 1938 photo also shows one bridge, then a second bridge a little further to the south. If you zoom into the second bridge, you can see a series of pilings there. In 1938, these pilings would have looked similar to the pilings shown in this image. Finally, the 1938 image also shows a cut, or an area that had to be dug down along the spur track. By 1949, you could still pick out the main line of the railroad and the spur track to the east. The image also shows Bridge 1, Bridge 2, and the cut to the east. It also shows areas of fill on both sides of Bridges 1 and 2, and also an elevated area of fill near the junction of the spur track. This is a 2025 LiDAR image of the same area, which again shows the mainline railroad, the spur track, Bridge 1, Bridge 2, the cut, and the areas of fill. The same features can be overlaid on 2025 aerial imagery. Here's the mainline railroad, the spur track, Bridge 1, Bridge 2, the cut, and the areas of fill. We know the top map, or the 1894 plat map, showed two side spurs into the clay fields. Can we get any verification of these lines from aerial imagery? We do know from this newspaper article that branch lines were run to the pits of each of the three stoneware companies. Let's turn our attention now to the clay fields east of Claybank. This is the 1894 plat map of Goodhue Township. The map shows the locations of the land owned by the three Red Wing companies: the Red Wing Stoneware Company, the Minnesota Stoneware Company, and the Northstar Stoneware Company. Let's start by looking at the area within the blue rectangle. The 1938 aerial photo shows roughly the same area. The first question is, what is the reason for this curve in the road? Here is a closer look at the 1938 aerial photo, with the blue rectangle indicating the area we are focusing on, which was the location of John Paul's original pottery. This is the same area, just looking at the 1949 aerial photo. Now, let's switch to LiDAR imagery of the area, with current road names also shown. This maze of numbers and lines shows the elevation within this small square. Elevations less than 1140 feet MSL are shown in yellow, and elevations less than 1130 feet are shown in green. These areas are essentially clay pits. So to answer the road question, a clay pit is the reason for the curved road. That clay pit was John Paul's original clay pit. Okay, let's look at this next portion of the clay fields, outlined in blue. Here is the 1938 aerial photo that shows this parcel of land. Zooming in a little further, this is still the 1938 aerial photo, but we are going to focus on the area within the black rectangle. This is the 1949 aerial photo, and the black outlined area we are going to focus on. The 2025 LiDAR image shows us some neat details, the first being Minnesota Highway 58. Let's switch over to the elevation image, where the yellow, green, and black areas denote the lowest elevations within this area. As mentioned before, these lower elevations can be thought of as what remains today of the Claybank clay pits. Now, the image turns to the 2025 aerial photo, with the location of the clay pits overlaid. Most of these pits are now covered in trees and brush, so you can't pick them out from the air. Let's move to this area a little further to the east, but still owned by the Red Wing Stoneware Company. Here is the 1938 aerial image of this parcel of land. This is the 1938 image, just zoomed in a little closer. Of note on this image is that this segment of road was still being used in 1938. When we move forward to 1949, that road is no longer being used by the public. It appears the clay pit area had grown, and since Minnesota Highway 58 was right there, the original road was no longer needed. 2025 LiDAR imagery again gives us a different look at this area. Let's switch to the elevation map with the lower yellow and green areas overlaid, which you know are the clay pits. Here is the 2025 aerial image with the yellow and green areas shown on top. Now, let's shift down and look at the final area owned by the Red Wing Stoneware Company. This is the same area, shown by 1938 aerial imagery. The top half of this graphic shows the 1894 plat map for this parcel, and we want to see what hints are left in this area today. This is the 1938 aerial photo zoomed into our specific parcel of land. According to the 1894 plat map, there should have been a spur track roughly in this location. However, there is no sign of it on the 1938 image. There is what appears to be a spur track on the western edge of the 1938 image, and there are still some visible signs of it. Moving ahead to 1949, here is the rough location of the 1894 spur. Once again, There are no indications of the spur on the 1949 image. As mentioned before, it does look like there was a spur track on the left side of the image, although any surface features are pretty hard to pick out on the imagery. Switching to the 2025 LiDAR image, the rough location of the 1894 spur is shown again. However, in 2025, there is no indication left of this spur track. As for the other spur, LiDAR imagery does show remnants of a track, or a railroad cut. Switching now to the 2025 elevation image, the lower elevations on the image are shown in yellow, green, and black. The 1894 spur did extend into this lower elevation area, although nothing remains to indicate digging was done there. If you remember the LiDAR image, this area was very smooth. Since the area is being farmed, constant plowing could have smoothed it out. Let's go back to the 2025 elevation image and look at the other spur track. This track does seem to end near the northwest clay pit shown on the image. If we were going to add something to the 1894 spur track map from this parcel, it would be this western spur track. Then, is it possible this spur track extended further to the north? Let's take another look at the area within the red rectangle. This is the 2025 LiDAR image of the area, showing the first piece of spur track. It is possible that this spur extended further to the northeast to get to the clay pits within the yellow circle. However, we didn't uncover any signs of that when we looked at that section earlier. Therefore, I will not include this possible northern rail segment for now. Transitioning back to the 2025 aerial image, the lower yellow, green, and black areas are now overlaid, with the spur track shown in black. Now let's take a closer look at the parcel of land owned by the Minnesota Stoneware Company. This is the parcel of land as shown by the 1938 aerial photo. The 1894 plat map also showed a spur track into this parcel of land, so we are going to see if there are any clues to its existence on the 1938 aerial photo. Here's a closer look at the 1938 aerial photo. The 1894 spur track would have been somewhere in this area. However, the 1938 image doesn't show any clues regarding this spur. It is possible that the terrain was flattened by the farmer, or it was flattened when the nearby Minnesota Highway 58 was built. It does look like there are remnants of spur tracks along the south side of this image, which still show up as land scars. Looking at the 1949 image, the same holds true. There were no indications of the 1894 spur track left in 1949. The opposite can be said for the southern spur tracks. There were still indications of them left in 1949. Here is the 2025 LiDAR image with the location of the 1894 spur track. Nothing remains on this image of that spur track. Meanwhile, LiDAR shows the southern spurs pretty well. There are multiple land scars or railroad cuts through this area. Turning to the elevation map, let's again overlay the lower elevations, or the yellow, green, and black areas. Looking at the 1894 spur again, this map doesn't offer any other clues. Going back to the LiDAR image, most of this area has been wiped clean. Let's return to the 2025 elevation image again. This image also gives some indication of railroad spurs along the southern edge, as there are still surface cuts in this area. After looking at the evidence left today, could we make any changes to the 1894 spur track map? Yes, of course. and here are the changes that were made. Is it possible we could add any other spurs in this parcel? The answer is yes. The spurs shown could have extended further to the north. However, the confidence is just not high enough to do so. Therefore, we will stick to just the spur shown earlier. If we switch now to the 2025 aerial image, the yellow, green, and black areas indicate the lower elevations, or potential clay pits. The identified spur tracks are also shown on this image. As you can see, the low areas are either being farmed or are covered in trees and brush. Finally, the last area we will examine is the parcel of land owned by the Northstar Stoneware Company. Here is the parcel, as shown on this 1938 aerial photo. The 1894 plat map did not indicate any spur tracks leading to this parcel of land, but we know all three companies had spur tracks. This is a closer look at the parcel of land on 1938 aerial imagery. The 1938 imagery appears to show several spur tracks to the clay pits. There may even be another spur in the northeast corner of the image. So there were definitely some visible signs on the 1938 imagery. Moving forward to 1949, it definitely looked like a couple of spur tracks in the center, and another in the northeast corner. Even in 1949, surface land scars remained throughout this area. Looking at 2025 LiDAR data, the northern portion of these spur tracks has been flattened out, but they are still evident on the southern half. There may also be some evidence of the spur in the northeast corner. Portions of this parcel of land are being farmed, while other portions are used for homes. The elevation map may also give us some clues. The low areas are shown in yellow, green, and black. However, these don't help much because they do not extend to most of the clay pits. The one set of spur tracks is shown here, with the second set shown here. Most of the Northstar Stoneware Company's clay pits were located in the area with the highest elevation of all the clay pits. So let's try something a little different. Let's go back to the 2025 elevation image. The highest elevations are now shown in brown, or elevations above 1180 feet. Elevations below 1160 feet are shown in dark blue, and elevations below 1150 feet are shown in light blue. Again, the light blue areas would be the clay pits. There does appear to be evidence of these spur tracks on this elevation image. If we added these spur tracks to our 1894 plat map, this is what we would end up with. Looking back at the LiDAR image, it probably gives the best support for these spur tracks. Here is the 2025 aerial photo of this parcel of land, with the first spur track shown, and then the second spur track in the northeast corner. Now let's focus on that higher elevation area highlighted in blue. This is the original 2025 aerial image, and here are the high spots and clay pits. On this image, there also appears to be support for the sidetrack idea. So putting all the pieces together now, the 1894 spur tracks are shown in the top image. For confirmation, the placement of these spurs identically matches the 1914 plat map shown below. By 1938 and beyond, there is evidence that other spurs were made. I just have not seen a plat map that includes them. Again, this is a 2025 aerial image of the ghost town of Claybank and the clay fields to the east. If we were to overlay all the clay pits we have analyzed, there would be a total of 31. That is likely just a rough guess though, as that number constantly changed. Let's move on now and look at the clay workers who worked in these pits. United States Census data does give us some hints, although its data may not be exact. Here is the census data I found between 1900 and 1950. The number of workers in the Claybank pits are shown across the top. The number peaked at 70 men in 1910, then continually decreased through 1950. The average age of the workers is shown on the next line. Basically, the average age rose consistently from 1900 to 1950. The main takeaway I get is that the workers liked their jobs. They hung around for long lengths of time. Now let's look at the ages of the workers broken down into different ranges and years. This data is shown within the black box. The blue highlights show which age groups were the largest within this data set. Once again, you can see that the workers within these age groups were getting older. I think this also shows that many of these workers liked their jobs and stuck with them. Where were the clay workers near Claybank from? In 1900, most were born in Sweden. In 1910, it was Sweden and Norway. In 1920, again Sweden and Norway. By 1930, most were born in Minnesota. It could be a new generation of workers was taking over. Not much changed by 1940, and the same goes for 1950. Why did these men like their jobs? Well, the clay companies constructed lodging for their employees near the clay grounds. The foreman got his own house, while the employees were put up in a boarding house. Peter Olson was the first foreman at the Northstar Stoneware Company's clay pit. In 1892, Peter Olson and John Otterson contracted to provide 15,000 tons of clay. Peter must have liked his job too, as census records show him as a foreman at the clay pits in 1900, 1910, and 1930. John Otterson was listed as a teamster on census records, so he was in charge of hauling the clay to Red Wing. Martin Scramstead was also a foreman in the clay pits in the 1890s. Lewis Johnson ran a boarding house at the clay pits for a number of years. Lewis had started out as a clay digger. Nels Olson also ran a boarding house at the clay pits. The 1910 census showed Nels as the manager of the boarding house. It was a total family effort, as his wife Christine was listed as the cook. Son August was shown as the carpenter in the family. Nels Jr. served as the baker, daughter Frida was a dressmaker, and daughters Mabel and Esther served as waitresses. Gustav Olson also ran a boarding house at the clay pits. Gustav had also started out as one of the clay diggers. In 1910, clay diggers made $2 per day. The 1910 census showed there were 6 teamsters working from the clay pits, plus 1 engineer and 1 blacksmith. It was not all good. There were a steady number of accidents at the clay pits. One hazard at all times were locomotives, which could derail from their tracks. As an example, this is a photo of a rail car that had tipped over on its side. The locomotives could also hurt or kill the men if they weren't careful. The clay pits could also fill with water, which made them a drowning hazard. Some workers blew off steam by drinking alcohol, which could also get them in trouble. The walls of clay were very steep, making cave-ins an ever-present danger. The men also worked around heavy machinery, which could be a threat. Here is the remarkable story of a worker who was trapped in a sand pit for 29 hours. This worker, Edward Johnson, was an employee of the Red Wing Stoneware Company. Edward had gone down into one of the abandoned clay pits, which was about 52 feet deep. He had been in the pit just a short time when its lower end caved in. The sand buried him up to his shoulders. Other workers discovered that another cave-in would soon occur, so they knew they only had a short amount of time to save Edward. One man ran to a house nearby and grabbed a garden hose. He threw one end of the hose to Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson must have been able to get that end of the hose in his mouth before the second cave-in occurred, which buried him under 10 feet of sand. Mr. Johnson was able to breathe through the hose for over 20 hours, as other workers struggled to get him out. These workers had to remove the sand with small buckets. After hours of work, they were finally able to clear Edward's head and shoulders. Despite these types of accidents, many of the workers did like their jobs. Even Edward Johnson, who had been buried alive, was still working in the pits a year later, in 1900. The 1900 census showed Edward Johnson, age 34, born in Sweden, married to Selma, age 28, also born in Sweden. The young couple had 5 children, ranging in ages from 9 to just a few months old. 2 were born in Sweden, and 3 were born in Minnesota. By 1910, Sven Edward Johnson had become a farmer. With the story at its conclusion, let's unlock the safe using the combination found on those specially marked Red Wing jugs. Enter in 1, 3, 31, and 70, and you have unlocked some of the lost history of the Claybank clayfields. The next time someone asks you if you know anything about those Claybank clayfields, say there was one main spur track, 3 stoneware companies, in the neighborhood of 31 clay pits, and as many as 70 workers. Knowledge is power. I enjoyed making this video, but it was a lot of work. If you enjoyed watching, tell your friends about it. Subscribe to my channel, and spread the word about this unique YouTube channel. There is one more part to this series. The next segment will show video, obtained in 2025, of some of the clay pits. That concludes the video. Make sure to check out my other YouTube videos and my primary website at mnbricks.com.